Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General bringing you the roster reveal for the Vampire Coast DLC. We had all the information in earlier today, so let's go through the whole roster and see what we can see, shall we? So, let's start things off with the Legendary Lords. Now, we've had these confirmed over the course of last week. If you'd like to check out my videos on them, do check out the top right hand corner now, or there'll be a link posted in the video below. And we go through some of their sort of more defined faction traits and some of the information about how they'll play themselves. But in terms of new information we got, not a huge amount. We got confirmation that Luthor Harkon won't have any magic, and he'll be highly resistant to magic, which is very much along the lines of the lore. In the lore, he's had his links to the winds of magic severed, so him not having these spells makes a lot of sense. As far as Noctilus goes, we're told he's a hefty big guy, he's going to have a lot of mass even when on foot, he'll do anti-large and heavy armor piercing, so kind of a steam train really is the way that Count Noctilus looks like he's going to play, but not a lot of information apart from that. Now, one where we did get a lot of information was when dealing with Direfin, the new legendary lord created by Creative Assembly. And in the story we had so far, all we knew was that she was a singer from Bretonia who was on a boat, got caught up in a storm, drowned, and then grew up from the grave or from the sea, leading a ship, having learnt magic, and just rampaged around the world because she was very angry. Now, I had three major problems with this. Why is she angry? She just got caught in a storm. How did she learn magic? And why is she in charge of the boat? She was just a singer. She was a guest on the boat. Now, Wheels, in the video that Creative Assembly released, I think one of the community team, actually delved into lore a little bit more. And it sounds like down the line we'll be getting an introduction video into her lore. But what he said actually was as they were nearing the storm, the captain of the ship wanted to go around it. But this crazy opera singer was like, no, I'm not going to be late for my show with the Phoenix King, which again, I maybe have problem with lore-wise, the fact that any human's voice think they might impress the Phoenix King, or that the Phoenix King would be willing to hear any human sing, is again maybe a slight issue. That aside, she grabs the captain by the throat and throws him overboard, commandeering the ship. Which at least maybe answers one of my questions about why she's in charge. Now, the rest of the crew, apparently a whole bunch of timid weirdos, and like, okay, sure, let's let an opera singer lead us into a storm after having just thrown our captain overboard. I assume this is because she's such a large woman, she's very strong as well, and so hefted the man overboard, and they were scared they'd get hefted overboard, despite the fact they probably had weapons and stuff. Again, has holes in it, but at least it's kind of making a little bit more sense. And the idea was she was so delusional that she thought she could sing the storm quiet. So she gets on the prow of the ship and starts singing to the storm, but the ship sinks. And out of sheer will, out of the fact the storm maybe didn't like her song, she's raised herself from her dead. And they have given her an objective as well, which she was very much lacking in the lore. Like, what's she actually trying to do? And the idea is, he said in the lore, is that her notion is that she will sink Ulthuan, and by sinking the island of Ulthuan and killing all of its inhabitants, they will join her in the deep, and then she'll be able to sing to the Phoenix King. You know, crazy, but kind of at least it's filling in some of the gaps, and maybe once we have the whole story, it might fill in a few more. So something to look forward to when we get the rest of the story in full for Direfin and her operatic passions and pastimes. Now, the other thing we got was Aranessa Saltspite. Now, we've seen her before. We know that she's a character who was originally in Dreadfleet. And only thing I'm not sure if we got this information before, but maybe I didn't mention in the previous video, was that she has a netting ability. So she has an ability to cast down and pin a unit in place, very much allowing you to shoot them and take it and sort of just take them out that way, much like the spell in the Lore of Light that pins armies or units in place while that's going on. So that's a cool ability that she has that will be very helpful, particularly for an army like the Vampire Coast. So moving on from the Legendary Lords, we have the Generals. Now there seems to be only one type of general in this army, and that is a Vampire Admiral. Now the Vampire Admirals come in two forms, the female and the male. The female version of the Vampire Admiral looks like they will have sort of melee attacks, missile attacks, and there'll be a magic caster as well. Whereas the male form is more melee focused with more armor piercing and more anti-large, but he will also be a caster. Now, all the vampires in this army will have access to Lore of Vampires, the Lore of Death, and the Lore of the Deep, the new magic lore we haven't seen yet. And as mounts, we don't know what those are as of yet. They weren't put in the roster reveal information. Coming down the list, looking at the heroes of the army, we have the Vampire Fleet Captains. Much like the Admirals, they will also have access to Lores of Vampire, Lores of Death, and the Lore of the Deep. They will have as their mount the Prometheans, which are the smaller crabs, the bluish ones we've seen in the trailer and in some of the Steam pictures, and later on in this video as well. So that's what they'll have as a mount, possibly with two hand cannons on top of them as well, giving them some missile help as they charge through enemy lines. So the other heroes we have are the Mourngul Haunted, which we knew about before. Now these guys will be hugely devastating, potentially. They sound like a bit of a glass cannon unit, but they do have Stalk and they do have Vanguard. And for much of the Vampire Coast army, they'll kind of act as a flanking force, kind of a alternative to cavalry, I think, because they can sneak around and get in behind units and things like that. So that's those ones. They'll also have Ethereal, the Haunted Mournguls, and they will also be anti-infantry potentially. It sounds like they haven't really made a decision on that. They'll have Regen, which one has to assume will also give them a weakness to Flame. So Flame and Magic sounds like two things they might be weak to, but they have a very powerful and very fast charge as well. So something to watch out for, the Mourngul Haunted as the hero unit. The next hero we have up is the Gunnery Wight. Much like the White King, it'll be a resurrected kind of skeleton warrior, and they will have an interesting effect, because it sounds like a lot of the units, particularly the artillery units, and this is a very artillery-focused army, the artillery units will have something called extra powder as one of their traits. Now, what extra powder does is when you have more ammo, when you're fuller on your ammunition count, they will do more damage. One thinks the idea is that they're packing extra powder into the shot, thus doing more damage. Now, what the Gunnery Wight does is actually replenish ammo within a particular, one has to assume, an area of effect around him. So having him walk back up and down the lines, replenishing units' ammo, means they'll be doing more damage over time, and they'll keep going, obviously, with ammunition as well. So that's a very interesting mechanic, and they've actually said for some of these units, they've actually lowered the ammo count, so you maybe are encouraged to bring these Gunnery Wights to do extra damage for yourself there. So they've kind of made it so it's kind of something you should include if you're building an artillery-focused army in your faction. One other hero that is uniquely available to our opera singer Direfin is the Ethereal Paladin. Now, she has the Ethereal Paladin as a hero, but it seems like she'll also be able to summon Ethereal Knights. Now, we've not seen them in the army list as such, but they are a potential addition as well. They might run out over time, and so might not be a permanent feature in her roster, but she does have the ability to summon them. But the Paladin looks like he will be a consistent unit. So the Ethereal Paladin, we didn't get many stats on or much information, but one imagines a Paladin with physical resistance, the way an Ethereal has, could be kind of a very dangerous hero to have on the battlefield, so he'll be included along with Direfin's army. So that's about it for the heroes. Let's move on to the infantry. So in the infantry, let's start on the bottom rung of the ladder, the zombie Deckhand mob. Now, these guys are going to, it sounds like, be a little bit handier than regular zombies. In the roster, it says they'll be between Skeleton Warriors and Empire Swordsmen, slot in somewhere between them. Now, the excuse is that these are zombies that carry 2 weapons at a time, and so maybe are a little bit more dangerous. So there's this variety of the 2-weaponed Deckhand mob, and there's a polearm variety, where they'll be anti-large and armor-piercing, but they're still zombies, but something to maybe be a bit wary of, particularly if they're bogging down your cavalry while they're being peppered by artillery and rifle fire at the same time. So the polearm zombies are something that will be going around with their anti-large and armor-piercing. so beware. Next up, we have the Gunnery Mob. Now, there are a lot of different varieties to these guys. There's the pistol variant, which will be a hand weapon, probably a sword, and holding a pistol. Now, these guys will be able to fire on the move, not in every direction, but forward. Kind of, I think, similar to the Free Company. I think they could fire on the move. I can't remember 100% there. But this is something that the pistol variant can do. If you upgrade to the rifles, obviously, you get a little bit of armor piercing, you get longer range, but they don't fire on the move. Now, all of these units are particularly inaccurate. They did say that, but there are so many zombies in a unit that it almost doesn't matter, almost negates itself in terms of their damage output, because there are just so many of them, despite them being wildly inaccurate. Now, another form, apart from the pistol and rifle form of the Gunnery Mob, was the bomb form, which will throw projectiles. This is a smaller unit than the pistol or rifle one, but they will act much like sort of blasting charges that the dwarves have, one has to imagine, so can be potentially devastating. And the last one are the hand cannons. These guys carrying the huge blunderbusses, going in, shorter range, but very effective when they do get into range and start decimating ranks near you. And you don't need to be accurate with a blunderbuss either, stroke hand cannon. So those are the variants of gunnery mobs. You got the pistol, the rifle, the bombs, and the hand cannons. Up to you, depending on how you build each particular army, on how many of each you might want in there. Moving on, we have the Syreens. Now, these guys, we've kind of talked about briefly before, but they are ghosts, sirens, laying upon the shore. They will have ethereal, and like ethereal units of the vampire counts, they'll have armor piercing, but they also have an interesting, unique ability called Charmed, and this seems like something you can pop that will lower their melee attack. So really, they're so hard to kill anyway. You lower a unit's melee attack, that will make it so they slow down, they're just hacking for longer, and that's exactly what you want in this Vampire Coast army. You want to bog units down and then just shoot into them when they're in combat with your zombies or whatever else. That seems to be the basic strategy for the Vampire Coast army. So they would make a great bog down unit, particularly against something with a little bit of armor, do some damage themselves. So those are the Syreens. And we're going to get into a unique unit here. We're going to get into the Sartosa Free Company. Now, this is a unique unit to Aranessa Saltspite, and they're only hers. Now, I thought they were just going to be a Free Company unit, maybe slightly reskinned for her faction, but they're actually something a little bit different. They look like Empire troops, but they just carry axes. So they're kind of a cheap infantry unit that has armor piercing. So very early on, she'll have a decent amount of armor piercing in her army already, thanks to these Sartosa Free Company. They don't look like we thought they'd look. So that's how her unique units play out as far as playing her as an individual faction. Just really early armor piercing damage, which could be very useful indeed. So moving on to the more elite troops now, we've got the Depth Guard. Now, the Depth Guard are actually vampires. They're not risen wights as I thought they were when I originally saw them. So they're vampires in armor doing a lot of damage. They come in very small unit sizes, even smaller than Chaos Chosen unit sizes, and they are good damage dealers, but again, not the most sturdy troops in battle. In fact, in the roster information they gave us, it actually says that they are sort of less durable than Graveguard, but obviously do quite a bit more damage than Graveguard as well. So, unit something to look out for. We've seen two variants in the video that was released today, and that is the two-handed weapon one with two axes in their hands, and the halberd one. So, anti-large or sort of anti-infantry seems to be your choices for the most elite infantry of them. And it seems the best idea is not to have a whole army made of these guys in your front line. You won't have enough troops to cover enough ground, but to really put them in with a group of zombie deckhands, just so the zombies suck up some of the damage that we go in these guys' way, and so they can in their own right deal the excessive amounts of damage that they're capable of as well. So it seems you want to kind of implant these in a zombie unit and have them move around together. And that kind of does it for our infantry. So let's move on to the monsters and beasts of this army, which are a large part of it. Now, we're going to go through the first couple fairly quickly. You've got Fellbats, exactly the same as they are in the Vampire Count army, and you've got Scurvy Dogs, basically exactly the same as Direwolves, with a different name, and I'm not sure if they're looking different. They look very similar to me, but effectively doing the exact same thing as they did in the Vampire Count army. Moving on from those two, we have our Bloated Corpses. Now, I actually missed these guys in the trailer, if you see my original trailer breakdown video. The idea being that these corpses have been in the water so long, their body's been rotting and building up gases within itself, and we can actually see in the video that was released today, one of these guys going into combat. Now, what we heard, we see the explosion happening here, but what we heard is that they will do devastating amount of that. They can just wipe out a unit. They can wipe out a unit of Chaos Warriors if one of these guys run into it. And they are a single unit. So they will take up a space on the army list, so bear that in mind. But they're only a single unit, and they will die to missile fire and just explode. So they can explode in your own ranks, but as soon as they hit the enemy, they explode. So the idea, I think, is to hide them around the map, and then just have them kind of ambush a lot, because they will get shot out from range if you're not careful. So you kind of have to sneak them in, get them to do a lot of damage, and they can be absolutely devastating. Now, my only concern for this unit is, will it auto-resurrect after a battle, or will you have to recruit them? And if you have to recruit them, I hope it's a really quick recruitment time, maybe just one turn to get them in, because it would be very disadvantageous having to wait around to refill your Bloated Corpses after every battle. That would be a bit of a hassle, so I'm curious to see how they manage to deal with that. Now, as far as the next unit goes, these are the animated Hulks. Now, the idea in the original lore was that kind of, not only humans die at sea, but ogres and larger creatures do, and they've kind of like teased at that idea, but it's not really an ogre, they're just kind of these monstrosities made out of all kinds of bits and bobs, and they are truly horrifying. But these guys are essentially a charging melee unit. Now, they do have cannons on their wrists, and I thought for a while they might be able to fire them, much like the Necrofex Colosus does, which we'll get to a little bit later. But no, it sounds like they're just a pure melee unit, and so they just bash people over the head with their cannoned arms and break their skulls. So a devastating frontline charger, very effective in that sort of role. And next up we have the horrors, the devastation, the Mournguls. Now these guys, like the hero, will have Vanguard, Stalk, they have a very fast charge, they'll have physical resistance to a certain degree, they have high armor piercing, and they have regen. So they will be devastating, and I think they have anti-infantry as well. So if you guys get these round into skirmishers, they'll make very quick work of them, just do devastating damage, and they're just horrific to look at. And I love that these guys are making an appearance, and hopefully we'll see them folded into the main Vampire Count army as well, because they are obviously made for the Vampire Count army itself. So moving on from the Mournguls, we have the Rotting Prometheans. Now there's two versions of these guys. There's the melee version, which again has resistance to missile units. They're hard hitters. Kind of, they're suggested in the roster reveal as an upgrade to the animated Hulks, because they kind of fulfill the same role, but these guys have much higher armor, much better, and there is a variant of them that will have two guys with hand cannons, two zombies with hand cannons on the back, to add some just devastating damage around as the Promethean is doing its thing. Now, obviously, for those of you who don't know, the Promethean is a sort of long-established monster in Warhammer lore. It's a sea monster, usually looking more like a classic crab, but I kind of like the hermit crab look they've gone for in this DLC, because it allows them to put weird stuff on their backs. And these guys look like they've inhabited the skulls of larger creatures, like mammoth skulls, giant skulls, stuff like that. So I think it's a beautiful little aesthetic touch there they've added to it by making them more hermit crabby than just like your classic crab. So next up, apart from that, we have the Rotting Leviathan, a slightly larger version of these guys. This guy will play very much like the Arachnarok spider. Very high armor, high missile resistance. He'll have charge defense, which if you're letting him get charged, you're doing something a bit wrong, it would seem. But I suppose maybe because the Vampire Coast army isn't necessarily a charging army, they're more sort of block every way in and then just hope for the best while we shoot at them and kill our own troops army. So that makes a lot of sense, and there are some riflemen on the back of the Leviathan, adding a bit of armor-piercing shots from time to time as well. So, devastating animal, just charging in there, doing all kinds of damage. And next up, we have the big boy, the Necrofex Colosus. just a huge monstrosity of sinew and muscle sewn together with shipwrecks and powered by hundreds of corpses. And these guys are just horrific, and we learned a couple of things about their skills today. We learned that they are equally devastating in melee as they are from range. They do move and fire, so they shoot and move, which is great. And they are able to summon a unit of zombie deckhands around them. So they will be able to sort of lock you down with zombies, run away, and then shoot you down with the zombie deckhands they've just summoned. And I like the idea of it. The idea is that these corpses fall out of its hull, and they sort of animate and then just start running at you. So that's a great little addition for this huge monster, to be able to summon zombie deckhands just to run around and back it up a little bit, and maybe even absorb some damage if it's getting into a little bit of trouble as well. So apart from the big guy, what have we got left? We've got the Death Shriek Terrorgheist, which is basically just the same as the Terrorgheist in the vampire counts. It looks a little bit different, and it'll be one of these guys that actually provide a mount for Luthor Harkon. So I think he'll look quite cool riding around on one of these. And we have the deck droppers. Now, they failed to cover the deck droppers in today's video, but we did see them a little bit in the trailer, and they're not good at melee. We've got a few facts about them, but there are also two variants. There are the variant with the rifle or pistol in hand, and there's the variant which is called a bomber. So they'll just come in and drop explosives down and then sort of get out of there again. So two variants of the deck dropper. You know, it's good. It adds a little bit of variety in terms of gameplay for the deck dropper. And you know what? One of my favorite troops in this army, the way they look, just the idea of them is so ridiculous. I kind of love it. It's very Warhammer kitsch. Just these guys going around being gripped by fellbats and dragged around the battlefield. I love that notion. So moving on from the monsters, let's have a look at the artillery. Really some of the most vital damage dealing that the Vampire Coast armies can do. And let's start with the deck gunners. Now again, this was a unit that was missed by Creative Assembly today, but we did see them a little bit in the trailer. And they are sort of two-man teams, long range, they've been said to have armor-piercing damage, and they have Shield Breaker, which, forgive me for not looking this up, but I believe was the thing that would eliminate either missile resistance for a unit that was shooting at, or lower the armor of the unit altogether. I'm not 100% sure if I can remember which one, but it was one of those two. But it has that ability, these gunners, so you'll want them firing at a unit and then have other units firing at them at the same time, just to add to it and maximize the amount of potential damage it can do. We also have the Carronade, which is very much like the cannons of the Dwarves or the Empire, but these guys have two options, like the bolt throwers of the Elves. They have two firing options, which I'm very excited about. They have just the solid cannonball going for it, probably real good versus large, and they also have a grape shot option. For those of you who don't know what grape shot is, it was what used to be loaded in cannons in battles on the sea, just little sort of balls of lead the size of a grape, just crammed as many as you could into a cannon, and you shot them off at the same time, just leading to this devastating shotgun effect out of a cannon, and it should be able to just tear through troops who are coming at them. And particularly if you're amongst the first to take that damage, you really have to charge fodder at this Vampire Coast army because of that ability we mentioned earlier in the hero section, extra powder, where the first round of shots going out will do the most amount of damage from a Vampire Coast army. So you really have to be careful what you send into battle first when dealing with these guys. Next up, we have the Mortar, which is open to everyone. It's not just to Aranessa Saltspite, which some people suggested because it was an Empire weapon, but no, the way I saw it earlier in the trailer, it looked very much like it'd be open to everybody. So that looks like what she has, the Mortar, and she has two kinds of shot as well for the Mortar. The explosive, the kind of normal shot, and one that's known as Quicklime. And I'll have to imagine this is a slowing effect shot. Quicklime's used for a number of things, but also like in the making of concrete, so I'm not exactly sure what it'll do. Also in the decomposition of bodies, so maybe it has an effect versus undead. I'm not entirely sure. But I have to assume it's something to do with slowing down units that get hit by this quicklime shot while other units shoot at it. That's what I have to imagine. And then we've got the big girl herself, Queen Bess, a stolen Hellhammer cannon from the ships of the Empire, and she is just wonderful, isn't she? She looks amazing, and she will just do devastating damage. She has a high arc of flight, so hiding behind sort of land cover won't necessarily help you. She'll fire up and around it all she wants. A devastating range of explosion. If you're hit by her, your units will slow down. She is slow to reload though, so that's at least one positive. But when she hits with monstrous impact and just does huge amounts of damage, slowing you so even more stuff can get damage down on you as well. But you will be limited to having one of these per faction, I believe, treated a bit like a regiment of renown. So can't wait to see her just raining down devastation from the skies above. Just absolutely wonderful to see Queen Bess in the battlefield. And that's just about it for the Vampire Coast roster. I'm pretty excited about it. I like the look of everything. Everything's very detailed and wonderful looking. Seems like a fun army to play. I kind of like armies that camp out a little bit like the dwarves. So it'll be fun to do that with a vampire theme. But also it's interesting to see how long or how people will deal with it. How quickly people will get through zombies. Or if people facing these guys will just bring a whole bunch of trash, like a whole bunch of swordsmen, and that will be a hard counter to the Vampire Coast. Because although they will have some good units in there, as long as you can cut down the zombies and you have enough troops to be able to just absorb the artillery damage that they're capable of laying out, that might be a viable option. Just fill it with cheap units and just try and inundate them, because your cheap units are slightly better than their cheap units at any day of the week. But that's about it. Can't wait to hear how you guys think you'll strategize with these guys. And basically, as always, guys, a huge thank you all for watching. And let me know what unit you're most excited about getting your hands on when the Vampire Coast DLC is finally released in November. Alright, guys. Bye.